welcome. Good to see you.
How's everybody?
Young people.
Golly. I don't know whether I've ever seen such a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed crowd on a Saturday morning.
Wow. This is really happening, people. We have been so excited about this moment for a long, long time because every now and then we overhype things in our culture. We call people legends because they got our Starbucks order right. But every now and then a real legend rolls into the story, and that's what happened today. So before we get started good, I want to say thank you to you, and we do, not just for serving the city of Atlanta, Georgia, being a great mayor to this city, doing so much for this city, but for doing so much for humanity and leading us as a nation towards the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, being a game changer and a history maker for all the people on planet Earth. We just want to honor you today for your life and your legacy. You have done a lot in your lifetime. We've been talking, I always go back in my mind, is Mayor Young, Ambassador Young, Congressman Young. How do you prefer to be called or addressed? Andrew?
Andy.
Andy. So Andy, you've done a lot in life, and we've been talking these last few days or weeks together about the fact that Jesus said every one of us got a talent. He told that parable about the talent, and we talked about how that wasn't necessarily a coin, but a talent was a measure. And so everybody got basically a sack of gold. One guy got 1 sack, 2 sacks, 5 sacks. You've got a lot put in your hands in your lifetime. And you certainly didn't bury it, but you've done well, we would say. I don't know, you probably want to be modest about it, but we would say you are a role model to us of someone who's done well with what God has put in your hands. How could you encourage us today with whatever it is that God's put in our hands, and how do you see that with what God's put in your hands?
Well, you know, I think I was born blessed. And it took me a long time to realize it. And all of my blessings I originally thought were problems. I was born in New Orleans in the middle of a block with an Irish grocery store on one corner, an Italian bar on another. The Nazi Party headquarters was on the third corner, and they were Highland Hitler. And my brother and I and my cousin were the only black children in the neighborhood. It was an integrated neighborhood, but we were different. And we had to learn to deal with that really in kindergarten. And so that turned out to be my blessing. My father, in 1936, I was born in 1932. So at 4 years old, my father was trying to explain to me why these people were Highland Hitler. And 1936 was the year of the Berlin Olympics. And so, you know, that's where I got in the Olympic bug. I mean, it took a long time to, to fulfill itself, but my father took me to see Jesse Owens in the 36 Olympics, and he said, see, this white supremacy, the Nazism is a sickness. And you don't really get mad with sick people. You have to help them with their sickness. At 4 years old. And he said, whatever you do, do not ever get angry with them. They can't, I mean, you can't help being born where you were born. They are born where they were born. It's not their fault. But somehow we've got to find a way to live together. And the best way to do that is don't get mad. if you lose your temper it's a struggle. And he took me to see Jesse Owens in the Movie Tone News in a segregated theater. And he said, see, when Jesse Owens won the first race, he broke the world record, and that sort of put a lie to white supremacy. He just happened to be the best, and he just happened to be black. But rather than give him his Olympic medal, Hitler stormed out of the stadium with all of his stormtroopers. And my daddy said, now watch what Jesse does. I said, he's not doing anything. He said, that's right. He said, if he had gotten upset, that would have thrown him off the rest of his races. He just kept his cool, ignored them, and went on and broke 3 more world records. and he said, look, he was 5'4". He said, you're not going to be very big. And you can run, but you won't feel good running from a fight. And said, the only hope you have is to use your mind. And if you don't get mad and get smart, you can think your way through almost any crisis. And he said, then don't be afraid. They're going to kill you. Now, my grandmother really prayed for death. And I guess I started reading the Bible to her when I was about 6, and she lost her sight. And so from 6 till about 14, until she died, every day I had to read the scripture and the newspaper. And I had to listen to her talk to the Lord and fuss with the Lord about leaving her here where she's a burden on these children, and begging the Lord to bring her home. So death has never been something to be feared. It's always been something to look forward to. And that was the way Martin Luther King was. He would laugh and joke about death. And one of his favorite ways of helping us to deal with our fears was to say, don't worry, look, I know they're trying to get me. He said, but you all like to get your picture in the paper. One of you all going to jump in front of me, get your picture in the paper, and you'll take the bullet, but don't worry. He said, I believe I can even preach you into heaven.
Wow.
And then he would start preaching your funeral. But he would preach your funeral not like the Martin Luther King you've seen in public, more like Richard Pryor or Eddie Murphy. I mean, he would say all of the most embarrassing things he could think of about you, and he'd ask God to forgive you, and he'd make excuses for you, but you ended up laughing at your own death. And I think that's the way he helped us to go from day to day without being, really without showing fear.
You've already helped us so much in just a few minutes. It's really remarkable. I want to talk a little bit, Andy, Ambassador Young.
Andy.
I'm going to have a hard time with that. I'll just go with Mayor and Ambassador. I'll rotate between those. But I want to talk about perseverance because you are very optimistic and hopeful. We've only had a few brief interactions, but your optimism and hope register is high. But I want to take us back today to a few of the difficult times in our nation because you've been a part of a few of the most difficult days in the history of America. And I want to go back to February 1965. Jimmy Lee Jackson is murdered, and it sets off a wave of events in Alabama. And you come into that situation, which is a pretty complicated situation from reading about it from the outside. And you show up in Selma, and tell us about that march that followed and what that represented to us as a nation, but tell us about your particular viewpoint of what was happening in those days.
Well, you know, my call to the ministry almost came in that town. I mean, I was almost tricked into going to Marion, Alabama in 1952. And my father wanted me to be a dentist.
He was a dentist, right?
He was a dentist. And when I said I said, I don't know that I want to be a preacher, but I don't know anything about life or the Bible, and I really would like to do a year studying theology. And he he said, look, if you're going to go that way, you're on your own. Now, he was a good deacon and went to church every Sunday, sang in the choir, tithed, better than tithe. But he said, all the preachers I know are either poor or crooked. And I don't want to waste, if you're going that way, I don't want to waste my money. And but it was basically because he was a baseball player and a dentist. And he was from the country, and all these country boys went up in the Catskills and played baseball, and played baseball and waited tables. And that's the way they earned their tuition for dental school, because these country clubs would gamble and bet back and forth. So that was the way he wanted me to be secure. And I think that's one of the greatest dangers for us and our children. We want our children to be safe and secure. And that's not the way life was meant to be. But he said, look, if you're a dentist, you can make $10,000 a year, and you can feed your children, and you can send them to college, you can own your own home. And so he really just wanted security, see. And I was not interested in that at 19 or 20. And nobody should be. You should be willing to go into a land that you know not and try to live by faith. So I ended up coming to Marion, Alabama, because they needed somebody to run a summer program. And this was a very interesting county in Alabama, which I ended up going into the house of the family that was to feed me and take care of me for the first week. And there was a Bible on the table, and it was opened up and underlined. And I say, whose Bible is this? This is interesting. These are some of my favorite passages. I said, oh, that's my baby daughter's Bible. I said, oh, Lord. And then I look on the wall, and I'd been on the swimming team in college, and here's a senior life-saving certificate. I said, this the same daughter is a swimmer? And what's this letter for? Oh, she was on the basketball team. And I looked at her mama and her daddy, and I had taken genetics. So I understood how genes work. And before she even got home, I decided that I was sent there to marry this girl.
In Marion,
Alabama,
yeah.
Which is the same place that Jimmy Lee Jackson got killed. See? And so I was comfortable with that town. I didn't expect that. And, but it was a rough town. And it's where not only my first wife, Jean Childs, went to school and grew up, but it's where Coretta King went to school. And Coretta, in her new book, would be very interesting for you, is My Life, Love, and Legacy, Coretta Scott King. But she was coming home from choir practice, only to find that her house had been burned down, flat to the ground. And her father, who was really a genius, but not very well formally educated, but a spiritual giant, made them all, her brother and sister and her mother, they got in a circle and they got down on their knees and first thanked God that none of them were in the house.
Wow.
And then they prayed for the sick people who felt that they had to burn down their house. And they prayed for, her father prayed for them that they never hold any hatred or malice in their heart toward these people because they didn't know any better. Well, Jean was living on the other side of town, and her family had accumulated a lot of property in Reconstruction, and it had been swindled out of her great uncle. And it was traumatic, where she, her grandfather committed suicide, and her father became an alcoholic. Her mother was teaching, and with the family vulnerable like that, the superintendent hit on her, and she whopped him upside the head with an umbrella, and she couldn't teach anymore in that county. And so it was a mean place, but these two women grew up there, and both of them had come out of their tragedies more spiritual. And a young couple, young Quaker couple, had come down from Indiana to teach and found a way to get Coretta and her sister scholarships to Antioch College in Ohio, and Jean and her two sisters to Manchester College in Indiana. Manchester was a Church of the Brethren college, and Antioch was, I think the Quakers had something to do with its founding, but these were two nonviolent, peace-oriented churches. So for me to find a woman already way ahead of me, and Coretta was way ahead of Martin too. And I really was upset because I had a job in New York. I'd signed up to run with the Pioneer Track Club, and I was called myself training for the Olympics, and everything was set. Instead, my mother talks to the conference superintendent, who says, look, everybody wants to go to the Olympics, and you can go there and you can work like I don't know what, you still might not make it. Everybody wants to go to New York, but nobody, if you don't go to Marion, Alabama, a church closes. And why put that burden on me? But that's been the story of my life. What seemed to be burdens has always turned out to be blessings. Just to make a long story short, she was then given a scholarship by her college to go to Germany to work in a refugee camp after the war in 1953. And she still wasn't interested and didn't want to be married to a preacher. But I followed her. And she wouldn't let me go to the same work camp she went to. But I was, we were both in Austria. We traveled around Europe together. Her sister had gone to Berlin because this same couple that got them the scholarship to Indiana had gone to Germany, and there were no black Americans around Germany after the war. And so they got a job for her sister in Berlin because they thought that there ought to be an African-American presence in the restructuring of Germany, particularly since Germany's collapse had come from its extreme racism. And so we ended up, all three of us ended up for the summer hitchhiking around Europe, but also going on a bus tour. And But I ended up in a work camp building a foundation for a work camp for refugees, and with students from 14 different nations. And so by the time I got, I never studied international relations. My neighborhood was interracial and international. Everything I did at Howard University was a very international place, and my mother and father always invited any of the students who were from other countries who didn't go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving. My home was always the place where everybody had Christmas dinner. So my ambassadorial training came from what basically was a ministry, which is a much better way to get it than studying books.
Yeah, amen. Talk about April the 4th, 1968, a moment that obviously is pretty etched into the history of America and the world, and you were there. What was that moment like? And talk about the subsequent few hours after.
Well,
that.
Believe it or not, it was something we were prepared for. We did not want Martin to go to Memphis. He was to be in Washington that Monday afternoon. We were in New York Sunday night. He had preached at St. John the Divine Cathedral. He had a meeting with Harry Belafonte, Dick Hatcher, and of Mayor Gary, and John Conyers of Detroit, congressman, and me, and he was talking about how do we get this energy and vitality of these young people into politics. We shouldn't have to march and demonstrate every time something was wrong. We should be able to have representatives that we can talk to that represent what we feel. And so that was what the discussion was. And about 11 o'clock that night when the meeting broke up, I said, look, you are exhausted and you need to sleep late tomorrow. And we don't have to be in Washington until tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. If we get there about 4 or 5 o'clock, have a meal, we can go on with your sermon, your church meeting there. And he said, no, I'm going to get the 6 o'clock flight to Memphis. Excuse me, I said, what the hell for? And he said, the sanitation workers are on strike. I said, they've been on strike. They're going to be on strike. That's a long one, and they're going to go on without you. You don't need to be everywhere. He said, no, but I need to be there. And so he went by himself, which is very unusual, because normally if we had known 3 or 4 days ahead, we'd have sent staff to prepare the way. We wouldn't have had the disruption of the march. And by his going by himself, he was sort of being set up for what happened. And everybody on the staff, well, we were all against the Poor People's Campaign. Not because it wasn't needed, but we started out organizing to redeem the soul of America from the triple evils of racism, war, and poverty. And we had made progress on racism and had 2 civil rights bills by that time. And the war, we understood that the war in Vietnam was not going to continue, and a peace movement had started, but nobody had done anything with poverty. And all of us wanted to wait. We said, look, the Congress is going to shut down in July. There's no way we can organize a movement between January and July. Why don't we wait until after the election and then with the next president? But he he insisted. And the difference in the movement then was that this wasn't a black movement. He invited 23 different organizations of poor people, urban blacks, rural whites, Appalachia, big cities, Hispanic, Native American. I mean, we had 23 different ethnic poor people's organizations. And, you know, being reasonable, it just wasn't going to be possible to get the attention of the nation for that kind of complex movement in 6 months. And so, but he insisted. And I think, I mean, I was afraid that he thought he didn't have much time. And he always said, you don't have anything to say about when you die. You don't have anything to say about how you die. The only choice you have is what is it you die for? And I think he went to Memphis because he wanted to die for the poor. And he thought death was coming. So I think many of us sensed that he sensed that. So we were not totally unprepared for it, but I thought, I mean, I didn't really want to believe it. And in fact, I thought we were making such progress and we had such a good relationship with President Johnson. And President Johnson had been poor himself, and he had taught poor Hispanic children, and he wanted to do something about poverty. And I think with our help, he could have. But I don't know whether it would have been much different. But we kind of knew something was wrong, and when we went there and it didn't work out right, we decided we had to all go and straighten it out. That day, the 4th, I had been in court all day because the courts ordered us not to march, and we had to go to court to get the right to march. And so I'd been on the witness stand all day long. And I came back and about 5 o'clock, and he and his brother and Ralph Abernathy and all of his guys he grew up with had been eating catfish. You know, the bones were all over the place. And they'd been they really had a good time because they hadn't been together in a long time. And they were laughing and joking and acting crazy. And I walked in and he immediately starts picking on me. Where have you been? I said, I've been in court. You didn't call me. I said, how am I going to call from the court? They don't have any phones in the courtroom. They don't. He said, you could have gone out. I said, the judge would not let. And I was off. And he finally, they all say, you're smart, Alec. You're talking back to us. So, and I said, well, what do you expect? And somebody threw a pillow at me. And I threw it back. And the next thing you know, everybody was picking up pillows and they were beating me up. And I ended up on the floor down between the two beds with the pillows piled up on top. And everybody laughing and clowning. And I mean, it was the happiest I had seen him in months. And then somebody knocks on the door and says, they're expecting us for dinner right now. You all aren't even dressed. He said, let me go upstairs. And he goes upstairs to put on his shirt and tie. And next thing you know, a shot rings out, which I didn't think was a shot. I thought he was still clowning because he'd been so happy. And I looked up and I didn't see him, and I thought it was a firecracker, a car backfire. But then I saw his shoes under the rail, and the bullet had knocked him out of his shoes. And it had pierced his chin and severed his spinal cord. And I don't think he heard or felt anything. And my first reaction was, how can you go to heaven and leave us in hell? You know, and nobody was more deserving but you shouldn't go without us. Say, and but it was obvious that he was gone, and we had no other choice but to carry on. And
they put a picture up a moment ago. I think this photo, you can let us know, the one where they're in the hotel room. This photo, can you talk about this moment? Or do you recognize that moment?
Yeah, that's Memphis and Bevel and Ben Hooks of the NAACP, Billy Kyles, whose house we were going to for dinner. This was a couple of days earlier.
Okay.
No, this is after, because Martin is not there.
Yeah, I think this photo is the night after he was shot.
This is after we came back from the hospital, yeah, and realized that we had to carry on without him. And that's a motley crew. I mean, you know, he used to say, you have to be certifiably insane to do what we're doing. And so everybody there was kind of halfway crazy. And I mean, seriously, and without him to hold us together, it was almost impossible. It was impossible for us to carry on, but somehow we've managed to carry on. John Lewis is not there, but John Lewis was not in Memphis then, but he joined us shortly afterwards, and we have managed to carry on, in different ways. It's amazing how everything he taught us and everything he wanted to happen, I think, has happened, except poverty. And whether you know it or not, well, you are a good example of the fact that we've gone a long way on race. And race is not the divisive factor that it once was in this society. And we've learned to learn from each other. And we are much stronger. You cannot think of a University of Georgia football team without Herschel Walker. I mean, I say, you know,
or we prefer to say Auburn without Bo Jackson here.
Auburn without Bo Jackson. That's right. Just to keep the talk going. Or Alabama without a left-handed Hawaiian quarterback.
You didn't have to go there, but
humility is a virtue for which we
is. Nick Saban's going to be here this afternoon. It's going to be amazing. It'll be a great interview. So you have gone on. You persevered. That's the thing. How do we persevere? Let's talk about the Olympics just for a moment. You referenced it. The highlight, I know a lot of us lived through that era. Remember the euphoria?
Can I go back quickly
please.
to, maybe for me it started at Selma, where I realized we were not in charge. We went to see Lyndon Johnson right after Dr. King got the Nobel Prize, and Lyndon Johnson had spent the whole afternoon talking about the war in Vietnam, and he really was not focused on us because he'd been convinced to send troops to Vietnam. And he kept saying to us, I'm sorry, but I know we need voting rights, but I just don't have the power. And he must have said that a dozen times. And walking out, I asked Martin, well, you know, he's right. He does not have the power. I said, we really ought to just wait till after the election, and I'm always ready to put off. And he said, no. I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, we're going to get the president some power. And I mean, come on. Yeah. You know, you Morehouse men are so arrogant. You going to get the president some power. And, but what I didn't understand was I was thinking politically, he was thinking spiritually. Yeah. And so this was the 18th of December, 1964. On the 20th of December, who shows up but Amelia Boynton from Selma, who says, you got to come and join us in Selma. We need your help. And she described all of the horrors and sufferings that were going on there. And so we went to Selma with no money, with no plan, and just go where I send you. And I like to tell this story because we did not know what we were doing, and nobody would admit it. And there was always somebody that thought they could make a plan to change the world. And they'd write up something that looked important and pass it around, and we'd agree to it. It was all crap. But we would do everything we planned, and only when it failed did God take over. And coming back to Jimmy Lee Jackson's death, Jimmy Lee Jackson wasn't supposed to die. He didn't need to die. And to show you how deep the poison of racism was in the South, he was not killed by the policeman. The policeman shot him, but it was a flesh wound, and a black intern removed the bullet, sewed him up, and left him sitting up in the bed eating chicken. And two white doctors, elderly people, took him back in the operating room and put him under ether and killed him. And so when the policeman was tried, the doctor had to testify that the policeman did not kill him. The policeman shot him, but he did not die, and he was in good shape. But the two elderly physicians were gone on somewhere by that time. But there was a meanness and a bitterness, I mean, that was quite deep. But if they hadn't killed him, we wouldn't have been marching from Selma to Montgomery. And, you know, there's no remission of sins without the shedding of innocent blood. And it wasn't just that Jimmy Lee Jackson was black. He was a veteran just coming back from Vietnam, had survived Vietnam and come back and was standing in front of his mother protecting her when he got shot. And so it was just the accumulation of coincidence, evil, or whatever it was, that put us in a situation where, in a pouring down rain, having to walk 6 miles to bury Jimmy Lee Jackson because there was no black cemetery in town. It was freezing rain, and that's where we decided we shouldn't be marching to bury him. We should be taking his body to the state capitol and laying it at George Wallace's feet. But deciding, no, but we'll bury him, but then we'll go to Washington, to Montgomery. And there again, we decided to go to Montgomery on the second Sunday in March, which is right about now. Only that was a leap year or something, and the second Sunday, the 7th of March ended up being the first Sunday and not the second Sunday. And so all of the people didn't know that, and they all showed up on the 7th thinking it was the second Sunday, but all of the preachers were back here in Atlanta or Birmingham or in their churches, because the one thing you have to do as a preacher is be in church on the first Sunday. And so 300 people show up on the wrong day. And but and Dr. King wanted us to hold up. I said, these people can't wait. I said, they're not going to go far. But now, if he had been there, there wouldn't have been a Bloody Sunday, because President Johnson would have had the Justice Department there, and there would have been, there would have been much more supervision of the Alabama State Troopers. But Lyndon Johnson was thinking of the second Sunday too, and we thought they would turn people around. We never had any idea that they would or arrest a few people. We never had the idea that they would turn horses loose and tear gas and create that kind of spectacle, which happened on a Sunday afternoon where it was cold and rainy up north, and where the featured movie that only 3 channels, the featured movie that was The Judgment at Nuremberg, where they were talking about the death camps of Hitler, and then for them to cut in to Selma, everybody made the connection, and it was an electric moment for the entire nation. But it was on the wrong day. And if it had been on the right day, it wouldn't have happened that way. So I'm saying that the Lord has always been using us, in spite of ourselves. And that's the reason I can't give up. And I've learned to start jumping the Olympics now. The reason I jumped at the Olympics was not just because at 4 years old my daddy put that bug in my body, but Billy Payne had been a football player at Georgia who had had a heart attack at 34. And while he was recovering from his heart attack, he got involved with the Dunwoody Presbyterian Church, and he took over the task of building a new sanctuary and raising the money. And he said that this was the first thing he'd ever done in his life for anybody else. He'd been very successful in business and school, football, but he said this was different. And he said to his wife, Martha, I hope I can do one more thing like this before I die. Now remember, the kid has had a heart attack at 34. So death is not a stranger to him. He's come close. And so when he says that, and then the Olympic movie comes on, and he says to his wife, I wonder if we could bring the Olympics to Atlanta. And she says, Billy, you're crazy. Well, he was. But he got 9 of his friends, and then they came to see me, and we all got crazy. But everybody in City Hall said Montreal is still $700 million in debt. But when I looked at the book, there were 85 votes. I knew 55. I knew how we could get 55. I didn't know them personally, but I knew somebody who knew. Well, I knew that we had 300 Japanese companies here, and that if we go to the Japanese Consul General, he would bring the Japanese representative here, and he's got an economic interest of voting for Atlanta. And I knew all of the African leaders, and there were 19 of them, and I figured, I could see that we could get 55 votes. We got 53. But it was almost like this was ordained by God that we be given the Olympics. And so it was, for me, an act of faith. And it was the fact that Billy got the idea in church, and after doing something in church, that's the way the Spirit works.
So the Olympics almost were derailed here. Comes back to another tragic moment. Eric Rudolph tries to blow up, or he does blow up the Olympics. But tell us, how did the Olympics continue after that night? I know there was maybe some decision as whether they would or wouldn't.
There was almost no decision. It was like the bombing happened around 1 o'clock in the morning, and I had just left that park. And I got up and went to the hospital and to see how people were doing. And I wondered what we were going to do. We didn't have a meeting call. What happened, though, was everybody reported to their assignment at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was as though nothing had happened. But we had 140,000 volunteers. That's the way we put on the Olympics and we raised $2,500,000,000, and we were able to pay for the Olympics and have almost $100 million left over because 140,000 people volunteered. Mm-hmm. And they had to work to volunteer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my mom was one of them. She was so proud of that moment to do the training, take the shuttle, go through the regimen, and I think a lot of folks probably in this room today may have volunteered at the Olympics here as well. Such a highlight moment. Talk briefly about Atlanta. You said the racial issue really isn't that big of a factor anymore.
But the economic issue is.
But the economic issue is. Talk about Atlanta moving forward, because we want to be a part of the future.
Well, you are.
And we are.
I have met the future, and it is y'all. And I would say this is not my first time with this group or your similar groups, and I just feel like the future is in very good hands. And like Ralph Abernathy used to say, I don't know what the future may hold, but I know who holds the future. And so I know who's holding you in the hollow of his hand. And it's going to be all right. I don't know how. But we have produced a people that have sort of come together in any crisis, and we've responded to the challenge. And there will be other crises. But, you have to live with death. And when I saw I had to speak the day after these kids were killed out in Florida, and it was a luncheon speech, and I hadn't eaten breakfast, and I was trying to stuff my face, and they introduced me, and I got up on the stage chewing, and I really hadn't gotten myself focused on what I was going to say. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was that Dr. King used to say that unearned suffering is always redemptive. And I said, look up, raise your head, your redemption is near at hand. Somehow the sacrifice of these 17 kids has awakened a generation of young people, not unlike the student sit-ins and not unlike peace movements and not unlike every other movement, except that it's different. It's much more, it's younger, it seems to be more mature, it's multiracial, and they're smart. And I don't know how they will be used, and it's not the gun control issue only, is that they are awakening a generation to be sensitive to the needs of God's children, whoever they are and wherever they are. And so that, I just sense that and that's why death doesn't upset me. You're gonna die. I mean, you really. And if you, I hope you die. Dr. King used to say that to live and be free, you've got to overcome the love of wealth, not wealth, but the love of wealth and the fear of death. And if you're afraid to die, you'll be scared to take a chance on anything. If you're greedy, somebody can buy you off easily. But if you're free, God can use you in ways that you can hardly imagine.
Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you for taking time to come and pour into our house today. These are our best. This is our house. These are the servants of our house and our city, and you are such a great example to all of us, and so we love you. Can we thank Pastor Young?
Will you help me do something right quick? Now, I'm not a singer, but you all are. But join with me. It's an old spiritual. It says, I got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. Oh, I've got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. Don't you know I got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. Be all right. Be all right. Be all right. God bless you.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Amazing. Beautiful.